I want to welcome everyone. I feel really thrilled for tonight. I've been waiting quite a while for this call. My dear colleague Michael mentioned this wonderful facilitator that we're going to be meeting tonight, and this incredibly important topic. And I feel excited to have you here joining us. So my name is Michelle Yasuda, and I'm the program director for the Foundation for Conscious Living's Big Leap Home online programs. These programs support individuals, organizations, and communities in generating agency, connection, and creativity on our shared planet. And this forum that you've joined this evening, this community forum, is a place where we learn and discover together and create a feeling of connectedness across our world. And so one thing I want to let you all know is that we have something called the Big Leap Home Network, and it's a space where just the Hendricks community gathers. And so I'll put a link in there if you want to join us. Think of it as social media, but it's private. So there's no ads or anything like that. It's a place for us to join and learn and grow together. So I really want to have the most time that we can have with our facilitators tonight. So if you have questions, I'll just say this: if you have questions during the call, feel free to put them in the chat so that you don't have them stuck in your head if you would like. And there's also going to be a period of time at the end of the call for questions and answers. So we'll be addressing that. And if you have any questions for me, I will be looking at the chat. So if you have any issues that are coming up, let me know. So Michael, I want to turn the call over to you. But before I do, I really want to appreciate you for your skills and presence with deep listening. I find you to be someone who is an extraordinary listener. And I really am excited to have you here tonight, and I appreciate you so much. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'm really so happy to see all of these faces, many of which I know from some, yes, hi, Randy. From different parts of my life. And most of the faces that I know, there's some conjunction, some intersection where a loss, death, grief occurred. And I, this year, was given the privilege of taking classes with Maria, and had my understanding of grief and mourning completely turned inside out in the best possible way. And so I have been looking for ways of getting her message out, and this seemed like a wonderful audience for it. After Maria's going to walk us through the basics of her understanding of grief and mourning. And afterwards, I'll talk for a short period of time about how I've used some of the practices that are in the Restoring Resourcefulness to be able to be present and facilitate transformation in terms of my own particularly buried grief, which Maria is going to talk about. Maria, before I quickly started to write, and I got a fairly long list, but I'll keep it down to, I find she's open, she's generous, she has a deeply caring heart, she's passionate about seeing the world adopt a whole new and more creative relationship to loss, grief, and mourning. And she also understands how you can do all of this and still have fun. And anyway, I just found that revolutionary. I have been transformed being in her trainings. And so I'm just going to turn it over to Maria to communicate that to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that very generous and lovely introduction. And thank you for bringing me into this community. Thank you, Michelle, for welcoming me into the community. And thank you to the community. I'm looking forward to being here with each and every one of you. I see some faces that I know, and I'm so thrilled to see you all here. And I see a lot of faces that are going to be friends yet to meet. So I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight. But as Michael said, I'm going to start it with a bit of a PowerPoint just so that we can all kind of be on the same page in the conversation. So I'm going to ask if you all can see my screen. Can you see the PowerPoint? I'm seeing thumbs up from Michelle, so thank you very much, Michelle. Okay, so I'm just going to go back for 1 second to how to grieve and mourn with ease and grace. Most of us think of grief and mourning as suffering and torture and a place we really don't want to go. And the notion of bringing any kind of ease or grace to it seems preposterous at best, dismissive of our loved one at worst. And I think it's because we don't truly understand what the word grief is all about, what the word mourning is all about, and that they are not interchangeable, because in our society, we tend to interchange those terms. So we're going to talk about that and unpack that a bit. But first, let's just take a look at what grief in North America looks like. And this isn't limited to North America. People in Europe, I've shown this slide to, and they giggle right along with the rest because they recognize the fundamental truth of this, that it's different when it's your own. And the fundamental truth is we are now in what has been, and I'm going to say it's has been because the pandemic has changed a lot. But up until the pandemic, we were in the first grief-free generation where people could get into their 40s and 50s before they lost someone near and dear to them. The pandemic has changed that a bit, and yet the reality is still we now don't necessarily know what grief is or how to mourn our losses. So instead, what happens is we start to get these buck up and move on messages from people who are entirely well-meaning and quite frankly don't know what they're talking about. If you have said any of these things, please know when we know better, we do better, and we don't worry about that we've said this in the past. This is an opportunity for us to learn better now. So buck up messages include things like just keep busy. That was my mother's favorite. So I want you to know I'm not immune to the stuff I'm talking about. It's because I've lived it that I'm able to shed a bit of a light on it. You have an angel in heaven. Dr. Alan Wofelt, who's my teacher and mentor, keeps teasing us that he is going to write a book called True But Not Helpful. And this kind of phrase would fall into that true but not helpful realm, right? Where it is absolutely true that I have an angel in heaven, but the reality is I'd much rather that angel be right here next to me today, having a conversation with me in real time. Be glad you had him or her for as long as you did also qualifies as the possibly true, but definitely not helpful, because it doesn't matter how long I had them, I want them for longer. And keep your chin up. Really hard to do when you're hurting so bad and when you're missing so much. Move on messages include things like, this isn't going to bring them back. No, it's not going to bring them back, but it is going to help me to feel closer to them. And that's something that most people who haven't gone through the process don't necessarily understand, nor do they understand the importance of that, because we tend to be in this, you need to seek closure, you need to say goodbye notion around it. And if you take nothing else away from tonight, I'm really hoping that you take away the notion that seeking closure is not what the grief journey is about. And most of us buck up against the grief journey because we think that the grief journey is about seeking closure and we're not ready to say goodbye. So we're not willing to go on the grief journey. When we understand what the grief journey is all about, we recognize that seeking closure is the last thing that we are being asked to do. When we're given any kind of move on message like be strong, inadvertently we're being told that our tears are weak, or that our sadness is weak, or that our pain is weak. And that too is completely inappropriate. In this society, if you have the courage and the willingness to shed your tears, to feel your sadness, you are the strongest among the strong. And so it's just mismessaging that's happening there. And time heals all wounds. While time may heal many wounds, grief is not something that time will heal, because grief is going to await your welcome. It does not await time. And that's where buried and carried grief comes in. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes here. But I just put these out there because if you know you've said any of these or a number of these, again, this is not about beating yourself up for I've said the wrong thing to somebody who was hurting. This is about recognizing what in me would have tempted me to say this, and how can I do better next time? Because if you are in the position where you are there supporting somebody who is grieving, but you are not grieving a loss yourself right now, then it's really important for us to start finding what the right words are and how we can truly be supportive of the grief journey for somebody who's hurting. The truth, the fundamental truth upon which everything else that I teach is predicated, and I say this quote many, many times a day, is death ends a life, but it does not end a relationship. The quote comes from a philosopher in the 1930s in the United States, Robert Woodruff Anderson. He was quoted by somebody that you may all know, Maury Schwartz. Maury Schwartz was Mitch Albom's teacher in his book, Tuesdays with Maury. And Mitch Albom then quoted his teacher to say, death ends a life, not a relationship, which is a direct reflection back to this philosopher. Any way you slice it, when you say these words to somebody who is grieving, what you're going to see in them is relief and release. You're going to see their face soften immediately, because this flies in the face of the common wisdom that says you need to seek closure. And what this quote says, and this fundamental truth reveals, is that the death ended a life. It ended the physical life of your loved one, but it did not end your relationship. Therefore, the notion that you need to say goodbye, sever the relationship, or seek closure is completely false. What we need to do, and what grief is asking us to do, is to honor that we are hurting because that which we've become so attached to, the physical presence of our loved one, is no longer there. And the grief journey asks us to find where the relationship is now. But because we have this notion that it's about seeking closure, our insides, and the truth always lives in our insides. And I know for the Hendricks group, you all know you are the experts in your life. You are also the experts on your grief, right? And so you are the expert that knows what's going on the inside. So when somebody outside is saying to you, you need to seek closure, every part of you goes, I'll have none of that, because it's not true. And you put the brakes on the grief process, not realizing that the grief process is going to guide you to help you to let go of the physical relationship and find where the relationship lives now. That's a whole different look at the grief process then, right? So the grief process is a process that moves at the speed of the griever. So we all want our loved ones to not hurt anymore. And so we keep giving them these buck up messages and move on messages in the hopes that they will move through it faster. But anytime we offer them that, all we're doing is denying where they are right now. What we can do to support someone who's grieving is we can actually support them in the speed of their grief and allow them to be the experts in their grief to tell us where they are. So we don't try to get them off of the sofa before they're ready to get off of the sofa. We don't try to convince them to go outside of the house before they're ready to go outside of the house. If we support them, they will get off the sofa and they will step out of the house much sooner than if we try and force them to. No two grief processes are alike. This is really important because then we can really claim that we are the experts on our grief. And in fact, how I grieve for one death will be different from how I grieve for another death because of all of the variables involved in each individual death. Grief produces symptoms on 5 different levels, and I invite you to start thinking about, have you had symptoms of grief that you didn't even recognize were symptoms of grief? Because symptoms show up on the physical level where our bodies just ache, or maybe we have specific pains in specific parts of our body. It affects our sleep, it affects our eating, and it can affect it either in that we eat more or we eat less, we sleep more or we sleep less. It's all very individual, and yet the symptom is there to ask us to slow down. Regardless where the symptom is showing up, it's asking us and inviting us to slow down to the pace of our grief. Mentally, we feel really confused. We can't really put 2 and 2 together. We start a project and then we walk away from it and we forget that we've started it. I've had clients who have told me that's just old age. I'm telling you, it's not just old age in grief. It feels very, very different. It feels like we're spinning our wheels and we're getting nowhere, and we can't make sense of these often mounds of paperwork that we're being asked to deal with at the time when we're least equipped to deal with it. The reason we're so not equipped to deal with it is because our brain is like a computer. 10% of it minimum is working on a fundamental problem. Where are they now? Where are they now? Where are they now? And we're not hearing where they are now. And we can't problem solve this because it's not a problem to be solved, but our brain doesn't know that. And like any good computer, when it's working on one program, all the other programs move slower. That's what's happening to your brain when you're grieving. It's got a priority program that's running, and it's not whatever you think you need to be doing in this moment at this time, because the priority program is the grief. And it's asking you to slow down to that. There is a whole myriad of emotions that show up. Everything from the fundamental pain and sadness to the anger, to the frustration, to the blame, shame, guilt. All manner of emotions show up at different times, and the key remains to stay present to what's showing up without getting caught up in what's showing up. Because we stall the grief process if we lock ourselves into or we shy away from and avoid whatever is showing up. Socially, we may feel instinctively we want to isolate, and yet we may be experiencing symptoms of grief where our friends are not allowing us that natural need to isolate and be alone for a little while and just get our bearings underneath us. Our friends might find this completely unacceptable, and they don't give us 2 free minutes. And at the same time, they don't stop talking in all the time that we share, where all that we really need is quiet. All we really need is stillness. So the greatest gift you can give someone who's grieving is to be uncomfortable with them sitting in silence, because you will be. You'll be uncomfortable. You will want them to talk to you even if they're not ready to talk. You will want to ask them questions. You will want to distract them. The greatest gift you can give them is your silence and your willingness to hear whatever it is they have to say. That's how you really do support them in their grief journey. We also have symptoms that show up on the spiritual level, including the heavy hitter questions, because this is a dark night of the soul. There's no 2 ways about it. And so we start questioning our faith. And sometimes there are people outside in our community who challenge us with this and may even say things like, if you're questioning your faith, then you don't trust your faith. You have to trust your faith. If you're hurting this badly, you're not trusting that they're in heaven. That is not helpful, because right now, of course, we're questioning our faith. And so we need to be very mindful of who are the supportive people in our world and who aren't. Over time, symptoms soften when grief is converted to mourning. So I'm going to talk about the difference between grief and mourning and how do you convert grief to mourning. These symptoms that I've been talking about soften over time if the conversion happens. If it doesn't happen, then it hardens and it becomes buried and carried grief. We'll talk more about that in a minute. The grief journey fundamentally is a sacred one. And when it's done well, it really can be joyful and light because it's an invitation for the memories to show up. It's an invitation to reconnect to the love that we felt and to find the new ways that we can connect with our loved one. Because remember, it's all about finding where that relationship is now. In order to do that, we have to be willing to go through the pain of it's not the way we want it to be right now. So when we define our terms, we need to recognize when we talk about bereavement, it means to be torn apart and to have special needs, because somebody who is grieving is bereaved, which means they have been torn apart by this event of loss and they have special needs. Grief is the constellation of inner symptoms experienced when we have lost someone or something near and dear to us. So please understand, grief isn't specific to a death in your world. Grief shows up when you've had any kind of loss. Grief shows up when a house burns down. Grief shows up in a myriad of different ways, in a myriad of different circumstances, when a relationship breaks up, when a divorce happens. There are all kinds of grief. Grief simply means that it is the constellation of inner symptoms. But let's focus for a second on this notion of inner, because grief is the inner experience of loss. We convert it to mourning when we take what is inside and we express it outside, because mourning is the external expression of our inner experience of grief. So when I say what we want to do is we want to convert our grief to mourning, and that softens the symptoms, what I'm saying is whatever the constellation of the symptoms are, whatever those inner emotions are, whatever the inner mental battle is, whatever the inner physical experience is, all of those symptoms that are happening on the inside, when we find a way to express them on the outside, whether we're shedding tears, whether we're journaling, whether we're sharing a story with a friend, that is mourning. And that's why the best that you can do to companion someone is to sit quietly with them and allow them to find the expression that they feel safe sharing with you. Because what you've done is you've helped them to convert their grief to mourning. And that's why you don't want to stop them when they're crying, because crying will come to its natural conclusion. And when you allow it to do that, you've supported them in converting their grief to mourning. The importance of converting to grief to mourning is it empowers the person who is grieving. It empowers the bereaved. It allows them to have control of their grief process. And that's exactly what they need. They need to know that you trust them to do what they most need to do, because in this moment, they don't trust themselves to know the pathway, and yet they are the experts on their grief. And it prevents buried and carried grief. So let's talk about what buried and carried grief is. I love this picture with one exception. So if you think about your grief kind of like this backpack, the challenge with the notion of a backpack is a backpack you can take off or you can put on. Now imagine that this backpack lives in your belly, and there is no taking it off or taking it on, because that's where buried and carried grief does live. It lives in your body and it weighs you down and it becomes very heavy to carry over time, right? Buried and carried grief fundamentally is grief that has not been converted to mourning. So it's not been given that external expression. So instead, what happens is it stays inside of us. And remember what I told you, time doesn't heal this. What heals this is allowing it to convert to mourning. Unfortunately, because we live in a mourning avoidant society, let's be honest, we live in a mourning phobic society that doesn't even allow it to happen. So we avoid our grief in order to never get to the mourning in that external expression. When someone is ready to do catch-up mourning, and this is the really good news, you can always do catch-up mourning, because as I said before, grief awaits welcome. It does not await time. And what that means is that when you are ready to, all you need to do is turn inside and say, help me to hear. Help me to hear. What is it that I'm grieving right now? What is it that I need to convert to mourning? Because it's awaiting that moment when you will slow down to its speed and you will ask that question. The minute you ask the question, the answer comes. And I know that for this group, you know what I'm talking about because you've been trained in how to do that. You're part of this group because you believe that the answers live inside of you, right? And so what I'm showing you here is truly a revolutionary way of thinking about grief and mourning. And I run the Healthy Mourning Revolution because I want to revolutionize the way people think about grief and mourning so that they take their power back. So that the society that really we have an epidemic of buried and carried grief. And now on top of it, we have the epidemic of pandemic grief. It's time for us to learn how to do this in responsible ways and how to support each other in it. The process of converting grief to mourning is the same whether it is fresh grief or it's buried and carried grief, because I guarantee you, when buried and carried grief, when you extend that invitation and it bubbles up, it's going to feel like fresh grief because it's stalled at the moment where you stopped paying attention to it, and it's going to come back. Our terror is that it's going to come back and it's going to take us out. We will cry and we will not be able to stop crying. And what I can tell you is we will cry and then we will catch our breath. And maybe we'll go through many, many cycles of that, and that's okay. We need to know that our tears are okay. They are healing. Choking them back is causing illness, and buried and carried grief results in physical illness. Buried and carried grief results in lives that are stalled. We all know people who used to be happy, but they can't find their happy anymore. And they've become angry because what's happened is the symptom of grief gets locked and hardened. In the same way, when we convert our grief to mourning, we soften those symptoms of grief. If we don't convert our grief to mourning and they become buried and carried, we harden the symptoms. So we harden the anger. And that's why people suddenly become these hardened versions of themselves, because they're bearing and carrying grief. A bit later on, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Healthy Mourning Revolution, because if you're interested in learning more about this, we do have a program, but I'm going to stop the share here so that I'm going to turn it over to Michael for a minute to talk about how this intersects with the work that you all do. And having taken the course and having worked with me in this, what he's discovered about the intersection points. So take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Maria. So my training with Maria has been 3-hour Zoom classes for 7 weeks in a row. That's per course. And I've taken 2 of those, and I'm in the midst of a third one. So you can imagine being immersed in this whole different perspective on grief. A number of things occurred. One of the big ones for me was where I had buried grief. As I began to talk to others about it and began to explore it, I could feel it surfacing. I could feel my grief calling for expression. And so I found what I would call the practices that are available in the Restoring Resourcefulness section of the Foundation for Conscious Living. And I believe Michelle's going to put some links down there. There are 6 practices that are laid out in detail. The videos are free. The explanations are downloadable and free. And there's basically 3 different sets of videos. So if you're at all interested in exploring this and saying, oh, wow, does this work for me? Then they're available and complete, as I say, completely accessible. The ones I found as I was going through the training with Maria that I used every time. One was, it's called presencing. And as you can see from her PowerPoint, when I experience, make it personal, when I found myself feeling these aches in me after we would have class, and what would pop into my mind would be this wonderful woman who actually saw me when I was 14 and felt totally unseen. Her name was Grace Fletcher, and she transformed my life when I was 14. And then I went off to school and then off to university and and then came home one time. And my mother said, oh, Grace got cancer and died. And at the time it was like, oh, that's too bad. Years later, I really recognized Grace's role in my life. And I felt this ache, like I didn't get to say goodbye. You gave me so much and I didn't acknowledge it. And that is how I would describe my experience of grief, was an ache in my chest. And to be with that, I was using the process called presencing, which you would find on the Restoring Resourcefulness. So simple, so easy. And the other are breathing techniques that are available on the Restoring Resourcefulness site. I was just going to lead us through one of those, because simply going through this information that Maria has done, I can almost guarantee some of us have been holding our breath for at least part of this. So there's this, it's called the centering breath. And I'll just do it very quickly here. If you want to take your hands, it's to get the experience of contracting. So gently squeeze your hand into a ball and feel that contraction, and then release and feel what that relaxation feels like. It's really cool to see so many of you playing along with me. So again, contract and release. So then this breathing technique, I'll just go through it very quickly, is you basically gently contract your stomach on the out breath through and allow the air to go through your nose. And then at the end of that out breath, relax your belly and allow a full in-breath right down to your belly. Allow your belly to fill as full as it can. And then contract again as you exhale, and then relax again as you inhale. So I'm going to invite you to do 3 of those with me. And just notice, check in how you're feeling right now. And then we'll go ahead and so do the exhale through your nose. And relax in the inhale. They're so simple, and I find actually now I'm looking at all of you and I feel like I can actually see you. So anyway, I would invite you to the Restoring Resourcefulness for the practices, because they totally support moving your grief to mourning and being present with yourself through the whole grief process, your unique grief process. And the last thing I would say is, if you go there and it seems a little overwhelming, or, oh, I've got lots of questions, there's a little button where it says find out. I can't remember exactly, it's something like find out more. And you can request a free session as an individual or as a group, to have a faculty member basically walk you through one or two of the processes so they make more sense to you. Anyway, these have been totally awesome supports as I experienced the transformation of the process that Maria takes you through. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That was wonderful. So what we want to do with kind of the remainder of our time, certainly the next 15 minutes or so here, is to open up to conversation, to explore. You know, I spoke about a lot of things, and as Michael said, I have no doubt that breath started to hitch at certain places, that your mind may have started to feel a little overloaded, or, you know, like the cartoon with the air pulling you right back. So if you have any particular question, my question for you would be, who are you thinking about right now? As I was speaking about these things, who came to your mind? And it may be somebody who came to your mind who you've had an experience of loss around recently, or it may be somebody who you haven't thought about in years or even decades. Because you see, just by registering for this, just by being present for this, your grief already recognizes that there's a welcome here, right? So there's something already that's wanting to come forward. And that's the place where that piece that you've been carrying for so long, or maybe you're just very fresh with it, is ready to be shared, is ready to come forward. The other thing I'd like for us to explore is, and how has your grief been trying to get your attention? Even if you didn't recognize that it was grief, but now that we've talked about it a little bit, suddenly you realize that that pain in your knee. Now, when I talk about this, I always go to my knee, because grief for me lives in my knees. And when I had a series of very close losses in less than a year, I realized that whenever I was feeling grief around any one of them, my knee would show up, but sometimes it would show up in my right knee or my left knee, depending on who was trying to get my attention. And I see some people nodding around this, so I'm guessing I'm not alone. Please feel free to raise your hand. Best for you to raise your hand in the reactions. So if you see the reactions bar below, you'll see that you can kind of do a hand up there, a raised hand. That is the best way for me to see you. Megan, I see that you have a question.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I'm having a little bit of difficulty grieving around someone who has passed, that right before they passed, or soon before they passed, our relationship went sour. And I was very, very already grieving that. And then, and so when they passed, I don't feel like there was any sort of resolve around it. So I feel like the relationship has been just sort of left standing where it left off. Like there's no moving through that. and it feels like it's almost truncated my grieving. Like my grieving it's buried definitely, and it's halted. Like I don't know, something's blocking
Yeah.
the full grieving process because of that reason.
Mhm. So sometimes when we've had a situation like a relationship shift that happened, and we're not in the best relationship with our loved one when they died, I'm going to refer to them as our loved one because no matter what happened in the relationship, there has been love there, right? Is that fair to say?
Yes. Oh yes, definitely. Yes.
Yeah. So this is a loved one. But when there has been these kind of added circumstances, it may serve to complicate our grief. And what you're describing is a complication on your grief. The way you say it's truncated your grief, right? That is an added complication. But if we think about a complication as just one more knot in the rope, it's just one more knot that needs to be unraveled. The loving, gentle way to do it is to ask ourselves, so what is the next step I can take? Like right now, when you just ask yourself, what is the next thing for me to do right now to welcome the grief in around this?
I don't know. It just feels kind of bittersweet.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
that's
what I've been doing is just remembering the good parts of our relationship and just really stepping into that loving place.
right.
But then there's still this
But that's not the truth of where it got
part.
left off, right? That's not the truth of where it got left off. So if this person were alive and walked in the door right now, there would be a falseness to just focusing on the loving memories. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So when we say death ends a life, not a relationship, part of what we're saying is that that relationship is still asking to grow, and it's asking to grow to a really loving place.
Yes.
Your inner wisdom knows that that's a bitter sweet journey. And if I only look at the sweet and I'm not willing to look at the bitter, I'm not going to get to the reward of where the relationship could be.
How do you do that without the other person?
Yeah. Isn't that the $1 million question? So when we convert our grief to mourning, when we shed the tears that need to be shed, when we write the letters that we need to write, when we do these different activities that convert grief to mourning, we begin to discover where the relationship is, and we discover that we're not alone in this, and that we're not actually doing it without the other person, that there is a connective tissue. But in order to find where the connective tissue is now, we have to let go of the physical presence tissues that we're so attached to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I say you are the expert on your grief, you've already been so brilliant about it's bittersweet. The journey is bittersweet. I have to be willing to be on the bittersweet journey. I have to be willing to yell if I need to yell. Say, you know what, I'm really angry that this is what happened. I need to be able to articulate all of that. Can you feel in your face how you just relaxed into that? Because I even
Yes. Oh, yes.
I even saw a bit of a smile, right?
And interesting how you picked that up. Yeah, because that felt, yes, that's a good way to express, to fully express what's alive in me about this.
Yes, because what's happened is it's been buried and carried, and it awaits welcome. So the minute you welcome it, it's going to go, yes, yes. Oh, thank you. Let's do this thing. And in there is courage, right? The courage to do what needs to be done, the wisdom to hear what needs to be done, the willingness to step into it. And it starts with being really present to the question, so what does my grief want me to do now? Because your grief knows the next step, and it's not going to give you too many steps at a time. You asked the how of it. Katharine Hepburn was not done with her relationship with Tracy, with Spencer Tracy. And she was really vocal about, I started writing letters and they were not pretty letters because I had some things to say to that man. Right?
Mm.
And for some reason that came into my mind as you were asking, how can I do this if they're not physically here? So I invite you to think about that as a practice.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. That sounds
Welcome.
wonderful. That sounds like a good idea.
And when I say it can happen with ease and grace, and just so I'm hoping that everybody can see how her face completely shifted, right? When we are willing to be really present to the buried and carried grief, that's where it becomes ease and grace. It's the fight against it that is so hard. It's the fight against it that makes it so angry and painful. But when we're willing to really be present with it, then it becomes a journey of ease and grace, and it becomes incredibly sacred. And I see your hand up. Hello.
Hi, I am wondering about anticipatory grief, someone who is dying that hasn't passed yet.
Yes.
And I won't specify, that a loved one who is dying passed yet, and how that the relationship hasn't ended. The relationship is still there, it's still present, but it's got an end to it, and an end that should be soon or might be soon or whatever. So
yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that you're going through this. Anticipatory is very challenging, and of course the person who is dying is also going through what's called preparatory grief, right, where they're in the process of letting go of things too. So you'll see pictured over here is my mother and I. And in her final 6 weeks of life, we talked about how we were going to journey this. And she didn't want to tell people she was dying because she didn't want to see that look in their eye. And the look in their eye that she was referring to was that preparation for, I'm imagining a time when you won't be sitting in that chair. So I'm actually looking beyond you already. Right? That's a very painful time. That's a very painful time. It is very natural that that's part of what you're going through, because it is your body's way of preparing yourself for the physical loss. And so your mind is working the problem 100 miles a minute, and it's taking you away from being present with them in the here and now. And I hear that that's where the pain is. Am I right about that?
yeah, I feel like I need to qualify this, although it's an animal, but it's an emotional support and a service animal who's been with me for 16 years. So
you do not need to justify an animal. You do not need to justify that. I want to be very clear about that. You do not need to justify that it is because I depend on this animal so much that I'm feeling this way. This animal is your life and your breath in many ways, but this animal is also your bestest friend, right? For most of us, our four-leggeds and our two-leggeds and our feathers and all, those are the ones who hear our heart. And those are the ones who respond to our heart. They are the closest beings to us. There are people in your community who will not understand that you are going through this, and they will not give you space and grace for it. And it's a shame. It's called disenfranchised grief when we have that experience. Really important for you to know. Four-legged, it's four-legged, it's a dog.
it's a cat. Yeah.
It's a cat. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, how precious.
Yeah.
That their inability to understand does not diminish either your need to grieve and mourn nor your right to grieve and mourn. And holding that sweet fur ball and being present with that sweet fur ball, that's everything. Yeah. It's really challenging to be present with it. What I can tell you about when I had to put my cat down, and we knew for about a week beforehand, She started talking to me in a way she never talked to me before about, I'll stay with you up until this moment. And then there was a moment I remember of a thunderstorm where it's just, okay, Mom, this is it. I'm out. You need to release me now. And I could hear her so clearly because that week bonded us in a way. But in order for that to happen, my heart had to be open both to the feeling that closeness so that I could feel the moment. And it's painful. And it's really painful. And there's no two ways about that. It's shying away from that pain instead of leaning in it and on it. Because the other thing that happens with animals is you find where the relationship is with them after they cross. And the way I speak about it is they cross the veil to the other side.
Yeah. Yep.
You feel their presence sooner and quicker because of the nature of your relationship on this side of the veil than with the two-leggeds. Two-leggeds we have a harder time with.
So try to be as present as possible. I hear that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
There's also just a part of me that just wants to be away, which is complicated because I'm in a wheelchair. And so I only have a few rooms that are accessible to me. There isn't really a place for me to go to be away because I feel like I'm needing that separation at times.
Talk to me about being away and needing that separation.
Just, she's in my bedroom and that's where she stays. And it's like, I want to not have to be in the same room with her all the time, knowing that she's dying. It's like, I can't go take a walk. I can't go outside without assistance. I can go to one room without assistance and that's it. And I just feel like I want separation from it because it's too painful.
And it's important that you take that separation time, and she'll understand that. There is no dying creature that I have ever encountered that hasn't also needed their own time with it. And that includes the felines. She needs her alone time too. And when you can sync up those alone times, it's really powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Much love to you, sweetheart. Yeah, you're welcome. You betcha. Do we have anything in the chat box, Michelle? Have you noticed anything there?
I haven't seen any questions there. Did anyone put a question in the chat that they'd like to ask now? And if anyone else has a question or a share right now, please go ahead and raise your electronic hand.
I was going to say, while we wait for that, there's about 7 minutes left, Maria. So
Yeah.
You wanted to use some time at the end to
Yeah,
give
absolutely.
some detail. Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you for that, Michael. If this is resonating for you and you want to learn more, if you want to learn more about what the myths of grief are and how, if you are grieving and you're being confronted with these myths, how to work with that. If you're looking for how do I create my wellness team? How do I find the people that are healthy to be around during this and the people who maybe I need to stay away from? If you've got a slew of questions, I do a 5-day, what I call the Healthy Mourning Revolution live launch. And what that is, as I told you, the revolution is about revolutionizing the way we think about grief and mourning. It's about recognizing that we do need to find where the relationship is now and that we need to learn how to convert our grief to mourning. So this is 1 hour a day, 5 days. We're starting next Monday, October 4th, and we're going to Friday. And we're going to be doing this 1 hour a day. That's also recorded. So if you're not available live, you can see it in the recording. And we have homework and we have giveaways. One of the things we give away is I have a book that I wrote, Healthy Mourning, Happy Loving, 52 Ways to Convert Your Grief to Mourning with Ease and Grace. So I give these books away to people who do their homework. They get put into a draw, and every day we have a giveaway. So there's a lot of stuff that happens in this 1 hour. Thursday is our Q&A day, and we just take questions. And we've never had enough time in that 1 hour to answer all questions. So invariably we go to bonus days on the weekend to answer the remainder of the questions. So this is about getting your questions answered. It's 5 days. It's $50. And we'd love to have you join us. And I think Michael has put in the link to the live launch if you want more information about it, or if you'd like to register. That's in there. Michael, I know you took the course, so I don't know if you want to say anything about it. I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I do remember that was I was signed up for your long trainings, and this was offered, and so I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll see if it's worth going to the long trainings. And I was blown away. That's where there were two things. One was getting introduced at a detailed level to this whole new relationship to loss in my life, and particularly in my case, buried grief. And then the other was there were many people there who were grieving. And so like every training, the learning opportunity happens, for example, when those last two people came forward and brought their real life example, is like there were resonance with me as they got to talk about their experience. And that was the other thing that I really valued about the live launch.
Yeah. What I really appreciate about what you're saying with that, Michael, is you don't have to be actively grieving to get benefit from being there, because you learn what to say to somebody if you're supporting someone who's grieving, but you also begin to discover where your own buried and carried grief is, and you start to subtly kind of release it. The reason it's called a live launch is because it's 5 days live. And what we're launching is we're launching the grief that has been buried and carried, or we're launching people who are in active grief into their grieving journey. It used to be funerals, memorial services. Those were ways that we knew we were now launching into our grief. Nowadays, we say, well, the funeral's over. Aren't you over it yet? We've completely misunderstood what those rituals are all about. And so this live launch is designed to help us get back on track with our grief journey, because grief is a living process, right? Death is a life process, and grief is a life process. And we need to learn how to process that and do the journey, and do it in a way that honors our loved one and makes them a part of our life for always, and not always attached to tears and sorrow.
Mm.
Mm.
Well, as we're winding down, I just want to thank you so much, Maria. This was amazing. I don't know the words to describe what I learned tonight. Really life-changing, beautiful, beautiful concepts, and your loving presence, which I'm seeing people writing appreciations for you in the chat, and really appreciating your wisdom and your kindness. And so I want to thank you so much. And if there's anybody who has a short question for Maria, we're going to stay on the call just for a couple of minutes here afterwards. So if there's something you want to ask really quickly, you can do that. But otherwise, I want to thank you so much. There'll be a recording that we'll post of this, so by next week. So you'll be able to watch this again and learn more. And I'm really appreciating the offering on starting on Monday. So thanks for letting us know about that. And Michael, as always, appreciating you so much, and thank you for bringing some breath tonight, and I was noticing my breathing as we were as I was listening to you presencing and how beautiful that was. So thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Maria.
I also just want to invite people. There is a Healthy Mourning Revolution Facebook page. It's a closed group that asks you to answer a couple of questions. It's just to make sure that the group stays safe, right? So if you want to continue in that conversation and be part of a community like that, you'd be most welcome to join us. Yeah, and to access any of that, just go to healthymourning.com. All the links are there.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yay. Well, thank you so much. And if everybody wants to unmute and say goodbye, please do. And we'll see you on the next Big Leap Bridge call, everyone. And thank you again, Maria. So
Thank you
appreciating
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Michael. Thank you.
Sleep
Bye.
well.
Thank you.